Hello, hello everybody. As you're all filing into the latest edition of the Zoom Cubes, also known as the Wednesday afternoon poetry series put on by the Brooklyn Rail. Hi, Lytle. My name's Anselm Berrigan. I'm the poetry editor at the Brooklyn Rail and also one of the organizers and hosts around this reading series. We've got a really special reading for you today, which we're very happy to have TJ Clark here, along with Lytle Shaw, Mia Yu, and Joachim Pissarro. I'm going to introduce Joachim in just a second. Who'll say a few words about the reading, and then I'll come back to introduce Mia, then Lytle, and then Tim, and we'll have a little bit of a conversation afterwards also. The one thing that I want to just call your attention to, if you haven't come to any of these readings yet, is that there will be links posted in the chat that will connect you to various works by the various authors who will be reading. So take a look at those as you come along, and then the reading itself will be archived on the Brooklyn Rail's website as well as on its YouTube page. So feel free to spread the word when this is all done. Now, Joachim Pissarro is a consulting editor at the Brooklyn Rail and an art historian. He's the Burchard Professor of Art History and director of the Hunter College Galleries at Hunter College. He was a curator at MoMA's Department of Painting and Sculpture. His recent curatorial projects include Alberto Giacometti and Yves Klein in Search of the Absolute at the Gauguin Gallery in London, Olga Picasso at the Picasso Museum in Paris, and a number of other exhibitions, including, and his latest book is Aesthetics of the Margins of Aesthetics, Wild Art Explained, which was published in 2018 by Penn State University Press. And he is also the co-author with David Carrier of Wild Art from Phaedon. Joachim Pissarro, please welcome him to the Brooklyn Rail.
No sound.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Anselm. And I'm joining my applause to everybody else. Anselm and I promised each other that we would keep our remarks very brief. Obviously, our audience didn't turn in to listen to myself nor Anselm, but Tim, Mia, and others. So what I'm going to do very briefly, first of all, Tim is very well known to all, if not all, most of you, and just reintroducing him would take several hours. It's absolutely impossible. Rather than talk about his vast and impressive or inspiring past, I'm going to do two things. Talk briefly about treasures to come, and there are two forthcoming books I'm going to mention immediately. One I'm very salivating to just see what it's going to be like. It's a book on Cézanne by Tim, maybe your first book on Cézanne, Tim, I'm assuming, published by Thames Hudson, which will be available in the fall. And just listen to this title, talking about the relationship between art history and poetry. If these apples should fall, Cézanne and the present. So let's probably have another session to discuss that book when it comes out. But the next one, which is much more relevant to today's topic, is actually titled, Tim borrowed, appropriated, one might say, the title of another painting, by Pissarro, Climbing Path, which Tim and I always bemoan is at the Brooklyn Museum, but never or hardly ever available to the viewers. And we hope Anne Pasternak might change that situation. Anyway, the title of the book is Climbing Path, Poems and Pictures, also says it all. And I think almost without further ado, I'm just going to say one more thing and then ask Tim to proceed. But I just think that this thing, poems and pictures, and the relationship, the dialogue between art history and poetry is one that is absolutely fascinating. And I'm sure that our audience will have many, many questions to share with us. In the field of philosophy, it's not a frequent thing, but it's a more, it's something that one comes across. I mean, you think about Hegel who went to high school with Hölderlin, and they were best friends. And at the other end of the pole, of the philosophical pole of modernism, if you will, Heidegger, who also held Hölderlin as a giant, as a hero. So that happens. But in the field of art history, it's a very rare occurrence. I can think of Mike Fried, who symptomatically in 1972 gives up art criticism and launches on to do poetry. That itself could be a subject of interesting thing. But with this exception, I cannot think of anybody else. And so here's how we are here today. A few months ago, so more than a couple of months, so September, Tim and I serendipitously found ourselves in the same city in Basel, in the same institution, the Kunstmuseum. This was not for the Basel Art Fair, Art Basel, but it was to celebrate the opening of an exhibition of Pissarro's work. And Tim is one of the great, if not the greatest Pissarro expert alive, no question, and gave an absolutely astounding lecture that in a way didn't need poetry. But amazingly and astoundingly, at the last point, as a sort of conclusion, triumphant conclusion, Tim said very humbly, in his modest and beautiful voice, if you will, I'm going to conclude with a little poem I wrote about this painting, Climbing Path. And Tim wrote and read this absolutely amazing poem, which you're going to hear about. I was flabbergasted. And afterwards at dinner, I said, Tim, I never knew that you wrote poetry. Have you done this before? And Tim said, I have a whole book. And so there we go.
Yeah.
So Tim, thank you very much for accepting to do this. I know that many of our friends are as eager as I am to hear what you're going to share with us. And as I said, there's much more to it. And we should have a conversation with the great Fong Bui to see whether perhaps the Brooklyn Rail, because I believe you don't have a publisher for this next book, the poetry book. So let's open the conversation on that as well. Thank you, Tim.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Joachim. So I'll introduce Mia, and Mia will be followed by Lytle, and then we'll hear from Tim. Mia Yu is the author of I Too Dislike It, which was published by 1913 Press, the chapbook Objective Practice from Achiote Press, and an artist's book, You, created by Thorsten Kiefer in 2004. She currently teaches creative writing and literature at the Universiteit Utrecht after completing a Ph.D. in English at UCal Berkeley. She writes essays and book reviews and has published them with Art Forum, Book Forum, The Critical Flame, The Hairpin, Jacket 2, and the Los Angeles Review of Books. Please welcome Mia Yu to the Brooklyn Rail.
Thank you so much. And thank you, especially for this opportunity to read with Tim Clark. I always love to brag that I'm a student of Tim Clark, and that was truly one of the most extraordinary experiences I got to have being a student at Berkeley. And one of the things that I think as a poet that I found so wonderful about studying with Tim is that he really taught me how to appreciate ambivalence, that, and one can be fond of things and have sentimental attachments to things and give space to that while also being incisively critical. And so that the capacity to be both fond and affectionate and tender towards things, but also to be sometimes even terrifyingly critical of those things, and for that to coexist is something that I think as a poet I learned so much from and got so much from. And so I want to begin with a poem that was published in my book that was mentioned just now, I Too Dislike It. And it actually begins with an epigraph by Tim Clark. This is a poem called History of Art. And it begins with an epigraph from Farewell to an Idea. We know we are living a new form of life. The question is what we'll see in hindsight, but for now we keep to those ritual maintenances that bide the minutes of the everyday. The consolation of arbitrary courtesy gives enough semblance to meaning. 200 million years ago, a number of approximation than imagination, in Ruisdael, a reptile the size of your palm began its descent into slate. The sun, insect, water, still comprising its flesh, mingled with rock and time, and the archive shored deep within that tissue soon acquiesced to a greater history. A sweet caress retrieved from silt, and the question rising from impression of what it means to be a draftsman, and how long would it lie there as it felt its body being lost to the world and the world spilling gently from it. We need not think it compromised to accept the promises of time and craft. There is this moment life gives way to art, and we can only know that it is past. What I'd like to do now is to read a bit of a sequence that's not yet published, although there's parts of it that are published, and it will soon be published by Neon Editions, which is a press that's founded by Lynn Haginian and Claire Marie Stanchik and Jane Gregory, that's out of Berkeley. And it's about the 17th, 18th century still life painter Rachel Rausch, whose painting is actually my Zoom background. And I use the language of her still lifes to think through. I've been quite I think especially with the news of this week about the drafts overturning of Roe versus Wade. I've been quite interested in thinking about how we can think about things such as miscarriage and abortion without being fixated on these categories of personhood and property, which is what the conversations always seem to go back to. So I wanted to use the visual imagery of Rausch to think through how it is that we can actually understand the what goes through the necessities and the emotional and physical necessities that ensure that all women have access to health and to medical care. So this is from a sequence called Rouse, the Ruse, and the Rush. I try to imagine what you would look like now. You would think it might be easy having two others, but you were first, and by the time they would be your age, you already have gone somewhere else. And it's no good to imagine what you would have looked like if just a little younger than you would be now, because you never were just a little younger, just as you never will be how old you would be now. Where are you now? See, I know I'm talking in circles. I'm casting a wide net. I'm trying to hold you in the heat of my voice. Where else would you be? I want poetry. I want to make this beautiful, but beauty is a recourse. It's a way of being fine with being futile. No, here is just prose and noise. When the gynecologist, or would he be an obstetrician now, cut you out, he said, did you see that? It was like, and made a sound. And it's no good to write it out, to put it into letters, to make it something silly. So here is just what it meant. It was so fast. It was so mechanical. It was so clean. It was so easy. It was meant to be. There you were. And to that point, I wouldn't think of you as a person. So it's not what he said that bothered me so much as that flinch I saw afterward when he noticed that I was there too, a living person who could listen. What could I see? I could only hear. Every sound we make is a bit of autobiography. It has a totally private interior. Its trajectory is public, a piece of inside projected to the outside. And that sound made, you were felt, you were named, you were heard, now you are there, always just there. It was so easy, so fast, so clean, it was meant to be. You're always now gone somewhere else here. The painter fell in love with things as well as people. She would fall in love with the moss she scraped off the bottom of the forest floor, the butterfly wings she stamped against the monochromatic paint in order to enliven it with texture, the glass jar that once held a salamander and her firstborn's placenta, into which she now weaves poppies, cornflowers, honeysuckle, and thistles. What were people but a composition of things, their lives just prolonged moments of such things held together, preparing themselves for the next stage of dispersal, rearrangement. But this didn't mean she wasn't sentimental. She loved her husband, her 10 children, the bees she scooped up between paper and cup in order to release it through her window, the embalmed fetus for which she plaited a crown of forget-me-nots and wrapped a bouquet of cherry blossoms and pansies with a silk ribbon to place in its small curved hands. She loved her long life, the 2 decades she outlived Rembrandt before she outlived Vermeer. And why not? If one insists on admiring the rightest red veins of carnations, the fine lace edges gathered blue as cornflower, the iridescent open parenthesis of the dragonfly, one must love the moss, thistle, shifting shadows in the background, offering to hold it all together. The painter even loved what the poet wrote. Every man and woman is free to accept or deny life, to accept or reject this questionable gift, this thistle, these shadows, this vein, this rustle, this ruse, this rush. I'm alive nearly as many years as Vermeer, and as a woman, that means I'm even older. And I've never known a scenario in which the opposition is truly between choice and life. Who would choose what we have to live? Who would live what we have to choose? In Dutch, the word vagina rhymes with page, pagina. In English, the word womb rhymes with the word tomb, or both read slant with room. In Korean, the word for surrogate mother or womb is seed catcher. Sometimes those seeds are caught and then cast into the ground to become a grain, a jellyfish, a rose. Who chose what we had to live? Who lived what we had to choose? And isn't there only a life then? Just as long as there is a choice, just as wide as a gray-blue room, with a pale gray woman in blue, fingers curled against the page in front of her. It's not that the little tokens of life, a pearl, a button, red cloth, nail polish, an offering hand, become ornaments for death, but rather that death and life are simply variations on the same arrangement. Here's a tulip smashing into a peony, an iris and two carnations swept out of the way. Here is an oyster shell resting next to the vase, its muted luster akin to petals wilting or fallen into compositional shadows. Here is red and pink and orange, but behind it, even beneath it, is gray, gray, gray. Which part was the part of living? Which was the part of dying? An architect in Vienna whose name you understand as empty or false once wrote, "Weep not, for this is what constitutes the greatness of our age. We have overcome ornament. We have fought our way through to ornamentlessness. Behold, the time is at hand." Time is at hand like a velvet pouch that opens to show the valves of a heart, with the thumb and forefinger maneuvered and injected with wax and resin to clutch at the corners. Isn't ornament still and after all a comfort? And as it is, I can place an empty shell on the table. I can fill this gray background with the delicate gray shadows of drooping leaves and insect wings. I can turn red blood into clear water. I can make myself hear the static behind the song. And I can say, you are there, there, there. Thank you.
Tremendous.
Thank you, Mia. Our next reader is Lytle Shaw. Lytle's a contributing editor of Cabinet. He's the founder and co-editor of Shark magazine and the founder and curator of the Line reading series at the Drawing Center. Among his books are Frank O'Hara, The Poetics of Coterie, Fieldworks, From Place to Site in Postwar Poetics, and most recently, New Grounds for Dutch Landscape, which is published in 2020. He's also the author of several volumes of poetry, including The Lobe, which is one of my all-time favorite book titles. Please welcome Lytle Shaw.
Thank you, Anselm. Thank you, Tim, for inviting me. Let me just share my screen. Can I do that? Yes, I believe so.
Oh, yeah. There you are. Good.
And okay. So I'm going to be reading from a book called The Molino Set, coming out in a couple of months from Cabinet in Berlin and Rollo in Zurich. It's a prose work on the Italian architect and designer Carlo Molino, a Bond villain, mid-century man of mystery, who I'd be happy to talk about more in the Q&A. He wrote a treatise on downhill skiing, engineered and raced a car at Le Mans, was a stunt pilot, designed amazing furniture, clothing, interiors, and buildings, and had the ability to draw with both hands at the same time. In his spirit, the structure of the book is a high-speed collision between architecture, history, and memoir, though the term novel has also sometimes been lobbed at me, and I haven't ducked. Each of the book's 23 chapters begins with a commentary on a single Molino image, And after the fourth of these, a second text in a different font begins to narrate my progress or lack thereof through what turns out to be the surprisingly dangerous netherworld of Moliniana. Though I quickly became fascinated by his film set-like modern design, if also a bit horrified by his Hefnerism, I in fact started working on this book because a Belgian designer, a graphic designer named Joris Cretus, who read The Moiré Effect, thought that Molino seemed like a character in that book, and so commissioned me to write on him for a catalog. Strange as it might seem, this was the third graphic designer to commission a book from me out of the blue, while the total number of other such commissions from any and all other professions was, quick count, 0. So this strange relation too became part of the project. I tried to offer up my flexible characters, my plastic words to this new appreciative clientele, but as we'll see, it didn't really go so well. I'll be reading from the penultimate chapter. You need to know 4 characters, 2 buildings, and 1 narrative fact. Dale Hungus, mysterious mining magnate, film company director, and Molino collector from Houston and Antwerp, who was a long-standing competition with the Menil family and seems to be Cretus's boss. Jacaranda Caracciolo, powerful member of the Agnelli family, also a Molino collector, and I visited her cache earlier in the narrative. Fulvio Ferrari, curator of the Molino Museum in Turin, and finally, Leo, the professional skier, Leo Gasparol, for whom Molino designed the Casa del Sole in Trevenia, Italy, and under the Matterhorn penthouse for the fastest man on skis. The other building that comes up is Fergan, a cable car station designed by Molino at the top of the ski area. We'll see that later. Narrative-wise, it will help to know that whatever love graphic designers were displaying toward me has run its course. Cretus has catapulted into me on skis, injected me with hallucinogenic drugs, abducted me in a helicopter, forced me into dangerous moped jumps, and most recently, tased me. Obviously, I owe you an explanation, but it's not one I can commit to writing. When you know the real situation, you'll feel differently about my role in the events of the last few months. I realize you have good reason not to trust me, so I'm just asking you to meet me in Trevenia. No mopeds, no wigs, no tasers, no skis even. Just meet me at the entry to Casa del Sole and I'll explain. It was May 24th. I was back in Turin trying to conclude my research. With the warmer weather, some of the gear Joris had used to torture and humiliate me in the past would be out of play. But perhaps he'd invent summer equivalents. What could he possibly tell me that would cause me to feel differently? And yet I seemed to be enjoying myself enough to go. The following day, I took the train to Châtillon and a bus to Trevenia. I walked up the hill and through the little green area to the entry of Casa del Sole. It's odd, I'd always thought, that the building doesn't have a lobby or any kind of entry sequence to speak of. Perhaps this was a concession to economic pressures, but it seemed atypical. Thus, rather than meet Joris in such a space, I had to call up to the penthouse, get buzzed in, and then take the elevator up. When I got out of the elevator, Cretus was nowhere to be seen. Instead, a small but solid man with a cowboy hat and a Rolex approached me and offered me a firm handshake. Mr. Shaw, I'm Dale Hungus. Dale had a deep voice with a powerful Texas accent and reminded me of the remarkable sounds uttered by my relatives in Abilene and outside San Antonio, where my father and mother respectively had grown up. But in Dale's case, this effect would be suddenly punctured by his breaking into idiomatic Belgian French when he received a phone call, which he did at least 3 times during our brief conversation. Even I could tell the difference between this language and Parisian French. Dale wielded a large tumbler of bourbon in one hand and a mug of Duval in the other. He seemed to be at ease with himself and motioned for me to join him in yet another configuration of Molino furniture, a bunk bed, 2 stools, some chairs, and a chaise set by the window. From the photographs I'd seen of the Gasparol penthouse, the arrangement seemed identical. We have a number of matters of mutual concern. I understand you and my assistant, Mr. Cretus, have locked horns now on several occasions. Now, I'm going to tell you something that he never would. The man is jealous of you. He aspires to write literary criticism, not novels, not poems, books about other books. He said this as though it should convey self-evident absurdity. Now, I know what you write, Mr. Shaw, but if you'll excuse my frankness, I can't fathom what Cretus sees in this tiny little uptight market. It's like a tick. All these pretentious words bubbling up in the middle of everything he tries to say. It's funny, it's never come up in our conversations or during the times when he's been hurting and humiliating me. Well, Lytle, I don't think he feels comfortable with you. When I take him out to a restaurant, you order him a side of spinach. When we're watching the goddamn Olympics, it's free indirect discus they're hurling. When I hired him, the first piece of work he did was a report on a chemical wastewater treatment plant in Houston where we were having some trouble. And he just loved the title, The Unreliable Aerator. I think he just likes punching and kicking you because you get to talk this way all the time, knocking you down with skis, injecting you with drugs. You know, I was about to explain that, in fact, I didn't talk this way all the time when the whirring of a helicopter cut our conversation short. That's him. He's going to take us on up to the command control center. Did I want Cretus piloting a helicopter in which I was a passenger? Hungus, a far more fastidious life planner than I, seemed unfazed. I followed him up to the roof. Climbing in the back, I could just barely resist the urge to snake my hand in between the seats and choke Cretus. I restrained myself only because he was controlling a helicopter whose blades were still spinning over my head. He gave me a meaningful look, but I couldn't decide which of the many meanings he wanted it to mean. Did it have to do with our past, with Dale, with graphic design, with literary theory, with Fergan, with all the ways he'd caused me physical pain, mental anguish, humiliation, with this upcoming helicopter trip? If he was going to be all into literary language, he'd need a kind of New Criticism 101 course to learn that ambiguity without any frame or edge isn't really ambiguity, but more like a bad infinity. He needed limits. But maybe before I could pretend to teach him this, I need to establish some myself, I thought, as I launched into the air on another poorly planned and dangerous tangent, ostensibly part of my so-called research. When we arrived at Fergan, we quickly moved from the station to the command control center Dale had excavated behind, part warehouse, part high-end interior. Here was an exact replica of Casa Miller, there Casa de Valle, another Molino's classic inward-looking apartments. I'd seen so much Molino recently that I glazed over. I was more interested in the excavation work by Dale's mining company. How had he gotten all this equipment up here? Dale noticed my looking at the infrastructure. He gave me a moment and then finally couldn't resist. Your thoughts, Mr. Shaw? Well, you've replicated the lightless conditions of most of Molino's interiors. I'm starting to understand why yours takes so much pleasure in humiliating you. Now, I know you can appreciate what was involved in putting this collection together. I don't know, Dale. Is there like 6 times as much Molino in the catalog as the catalogs make out? Because Jacaranda just showed me a similar warehouse full of the stuff at her Tyrant Art compound. You guys should really consolidate a single collection or work out some kind of conceptual clarity about what you display and why, because I'm starting to wonder if there isn't another cache of Molino furniture behind every garage door in Northern Italy. Sure is if you want to buy fake shit like Jacaranda. I'm disappointed in you, Mr. Shaw. I thought you knew enough to tell the difference. I had them chairs made for me, all them tables by Fulvio, and then placed discreetly on the auction market. Jacaranda just couldn't resist. She'll find out the provenance about the time my own collection opens. I don't anticipate she'll be real happy. Now I was ushered into the original bandshell of Molino's Teatro Reggio, which Dale had apparently bought during a recent renovation. I thought we'd watch a film in the spirit of Carlo Marino. A screen came down and Pasquale Festa Campanile's La Matriarca, released in English as The Libertine, began, but we spoke over the credits. I know you were pissed at the Manil family a long time ago, and I gather you have a beef with the Agnellis now. But what are you after with all these interiors and this whole compound? It seems to me like a world domination scheme from the old made-for-TV movies, like before the HBO Renaissance. You spend your life running a goddamn mining company, you better develop some hobbies. I chose art collecting and commissioning buildings in ways that could irritate and downright humiliate my enemies. I didn't give a naked mole rat's ass about Carlo Molino when it started. God damn it, if that wiry little Italian pervert didn't win me over. You see, Mr. Shaw, I realized I had asked Dale for this self-characterizing discourse, this account of his drives and motives. But as he built up rhetorical force, I slipped further and further into the movie. The opening sequence, aided by a Pepe Trovioli organ background, shows a grid of mid-century modern single support seats covered in black leather in the church where Mimi, Catherine Spack, goes for the funeral of the husband she doesn't love. And that's why we had those fires set in Cinecittà to help bring the film industry back to Turin. These seats, soon to be filled, seem to offer a matrix of individual stations wrested free from the collective pews of traditional church architecture. I won't be running a standard film company or production company, but one, was this new configuration of seats designed to individualize the audience, or did it just make peace with an already disaggregated character? In either case, the scene initiated yet another mid-century modern re-education of the senses. Growing up in Texas, my whole movie taste ran toward the most important catalyst of this transformation, we soon learned, would be Mimi's exploration of the secret love den her husband maintained without her knowledge, which she discovers in a literal process of putting his affairs in order. The space was straight out of Molino. I expect you've seen some of these films, Mr. Shaw. I nodded. After hearing voice messages from her husband's eager concubine, one of the many mirrors in the house retracts to reveal a projector. When Mimi turns it on, she watches her best friend Claudia whipping some literally hung up naked woman, while her husband, drink in hand, elegant tailored suit, makes smacker harder gestures, grinning discreetly and offering pointers. Like other Campanile films from the period, The Libertine is almost unwatchable. Cliches of nearly every kind, including a naked body causing a crowd scene, this time at a gas station, and almost brilliant. What keeps it from tanking entirely is that Mimi is only loosely committed to the trauma and response narrative, and Campanile seems at times more interested in a truly fascinating project of rethinking Playboy architecture and its worldview from a feminist perspective. Of course, distribution remains a problem, but we're seeing it with the move toward individual screens. The movie's Italian title, La Matriarca, gets at this dynamic. Patriarchy, not libertinage, is in question. The struggle is to reoccupy and transform this decor of male pleasure, which is designed both to be secret from the women who might seek to undermine it, wives, grandmothers, daughters, upstanding neighbors, and to operate as a series of views and power relationships that keep the architect, and every man who owns such a space is its architect, in the erotic control seat. Mimi has stumbled into a modern man cave of kinky Cartesianism, wherein the inner erotic architect tests variance on the proposition, I design and control sexual encounters, therefore I am an upper-class European or American man from about 1950 to 1980. The actress must torque this last parenthetical assumption and become her own architect, both as agent, deciding whether to initiate an encounter, and as selector of props and decors, of which there are many. This transformation is signaled in a sequence that begins with what at first appears to be a shot of her from one of the mirrors in the ceiling. We follow her body in various combinations with the furniture across multiple reflections until we rejoin her on the ground plane. Yeah, my national affiliations are probably a bit hard to make out, but I come to feel. Once here, however, we realize that in fact, we're actually on the ceiling and must rotate 180 degrees to right ourselves. This erotic and architectural writing undertaken by Spack's Mimi will now become the plot. Fungus had not stopped his monologue. He seemed eager to flesh out his own character, his relation to Molino, to film, to capitalism, world domination, nationality, rivalry, diagonales, etc. But I was satisfied with the brief genre sketch of him I'd already absorbed and kept as much of my attention as I could on the movie, which I could still hear over his talking. Now he had shifted to Cretus, which I thought was strange, given that Cretus himself was somewhere in the building and could easily have tried to explain himself to me personally. Something about a hydraulic plow the company had designed for moving rocks or snow in very constrained tunnel or mountain conditions. And yours had named the Uli plow. But I was more caught up in the sequence of Spack's erotic engineering operations with her lawyer, dentist, handyman, tennis partner, and several strangers encountered at random before entering into an open marriage with her doctor, Jean-Louis Trintignant. The film closes with Spack riding on Trintignant's back in a glass passageway that connects the two parts of the couple's modernist house. They pass Giancarlo Mattioli's Nesso table lamp, a swivel-based egg seat, some knockoff Mies benches, and an enormous phalanx of Arneo red fiberglass Pastille chairs, which line both the upstairs and downstairs hallways. As in other Campanile films, steamy horseback riding becomes an erotic apex accessible only after one has been turned on by the furniture. As the camera pulled away from the ecstatic Spack, touring her lamp and chair collection in the saddle, the pulsing buzz of a landing helicopter muted the soundtrack. Are you expecting guests, Dale? His concerned look conveyed the answer. Jacques walked from the warehouse up to the station, arriving at exactly the moment the side door opened. Hey there, Jacques. But before he had finished, Jacaranda had hoisted up a Molino mountain chair and broken it over his head. Was that a real one, asshole, unlike the ones you had me buy? Dale had fallen to one knee and was now rising. I don't know who's advising your purchases, sweetheart, but you might want to consider someone with a little bit of background in furniture. Well, Hungus, too bad you won't be around to live up to your name. I might have hired you. Jacaranda now charged, tackling Dale with a force that would have drawn approving nods from the NFL's most feared of free safeties. Both of them flew through the plate glass window, and onto a catwalk facing the drop-off. They had landed in the section without a railing where the gondola used to dock. Dale had fallen further and was holding onto the platform with his hands, his body dangling below. Jacaranda, who had come to rest a couple of feet closer to the window, was now kicking herself up and beginning to step on Dale's hands with her high heels. Suddenly, Pretis, who I hadn't noticed was upstairs, came sprinting out the door and blindsided Jacaranda, sending her over Dale's head into the abyss. Dale looked up, stunned and relieved. Pretis smiled down at him and then began to stomp on each of Dale's hands in rapid sequence, sending him after Jacaranda. Now that's the kind of lateral swipe I like, Pretis gloated to himself before turning back toward the station and me. Statistically, it seemed a little safer to remain inside, though not quite as safe as I would have preferred, but I wasn't being backed up against the open dock with a weapon. Indeed, Joris was now, to my surprise, inviting me to board the helicopter. My conversation with the pilot was, I have to admit, a little on the stiff side during our ride back down the mountain. Partly it was my fault, since I was focused on developing an inventory of all the possible ways he could eject me from the vehicle without losing control of it. That none seemed plausible struck me more as a failure in my imagination than as a clear indication that I was at least temporarily safe, and so kept trying to imagine others, which I think may have somewhat dampened my ability to produce small talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Lytle. I had no idea you could do an accent like that. Our next, now we're going to hear from T.J. Clark, who is taught at various places in England and the United States over the years, and specifically from 1988 to 2010 at UC Berkeley, where he's the George C. and Helen N. Pardee Chair Emeritus. Clark's the author of a series of books on the social character and formal dynamics of modern art, most recently Heaven on Earth, Painting and the Life to Come, which was published in 2018. And I'll just add that his book, The Site of Death, an Experiment in Art Writing, does also, I believe, contain some of his poems. Please welcome T.J. Clark.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anselm. And just, quick and heartfelt thank yous to Joachim for sort of, I think, sort of setting this up, and Lytle and Mia for agreeing to read. You will gather that one of the things that I particularly liked but was scared about, the two of them at Berkeley, is that you never knew what was going to happen next, what they were going to throw at you. Maybe Lytle's going to explain how he made his way from a book about Hobbema and Ruisdael and Dutch landscape painting to this, the ski resort. But I want to hear that. I'm just going to show you pictures, as we go. That's great. This first one, all of these are from a book called Climbing Path, Poems and Pictures, which at the moment no one wants to publish. If there's anyone out there, keep listening. It just is a book that involves having pictures quite well reproduced and poems to go with them. This first one is called A Dwarf. And I'll, give you for all the poems just a little brief intro. This one actually has an intro on the page, which I'll read. Marie or Marie Barbara is the second figure on the right in Las Meninas. Her name has something to do with pretty little flowers. Barbara, an Austrian, arrived at the Spanish court in 1651, 5 years before Velázquez painted her, and stayed there as Enana de la Reina, the Queen's dwarf, for half a century, at which point her position, thought to be old-fashioned, was abolished. The post of court fool was also discontinued. She returned to Austria to die. The poets who first tried to find words for Velázquez, creatures of the high Baroque, courtiers, metaphysicals, came up with the idea of a distance built into the way he painted. Perhaps distance for them inevitably meant disillusion. One half of the world is laughing at the other, and both are fools. They thought, for example, that as one looked at the rustle of shadow on Mary Barbara's face, one saw that the face, the flesh, the whole achondroplastic reality of the woman was not there in the information given to the eye. They wanted their words to be used with a similar acknowledgement of limits. But at the same time, these poets knew that the distance, the coolness, the immaterial, unfamiliar materiality of Velázquez's technique was what made his dwarves come close. It was a strange kind of closeness, since the point of Velázquez's way of painting was that from now on, knowledge depended on the very idea of interpretation, of mutuality, being cancelled by the brushstrokes' entire exteriority to us and to the world we normally inhabit, the world of other minds. These days, it is said that the hard question is how the firing of synapses in a great tangle of fibers could possibly have produced the phenomenon called self-consciousness. The question the poets took Velázquez to be asking is every bit as mysterious, and perhaps it's the same question, or Velázquez's version of it, the way the question came up for him confronting Mary Barbara's self-consciousness, and the way the question once put, once concentrated in Barbara's attention to us, exerts such pressure on so many of the things we are supposed to believe, to feel, to be. Now, I guess there are the pictures on some kind of timer, because we shouldn't really, yeah, let's go on to the next one, but let's keep the next one now for the whole of the poem. I'll tell you when to move. This one's about a Cézanne in the National Gallery in London. This is it, Hillside in Provence. Everything in a picture is turned to face us, but in a good picture, the turning is done with tact, almost reluctantly, so that we see a kind of shadow world, shadows softer and brighter than the things that cast them, standing next to the trees come forward to meet us, made from objects we sense as much as see, forms not belonging to the world we're part of, gradients, unfoldings of infinite space, the rocks on the quarry wall. How this other world takes place in us and why we fear it is Cézanne's subject. Maybe the ivory road, or is it a riverbed in the foreground of Hillside in Provence, is intended to spell this out. It is the floor of the earth emerging after the flood, with colors stacked in a small, neat pile to one side, as if waiting to be used. The road is not ominous or remote, just not continuous with the world we know. It is the least anthropological ground plane ever painted. But then, why is the scene erected on top of it, with the road as necessary footing, so entirely alive? Why is its coldness a fire? There's a poem by Ammons in which a blackbird shoots through a vacancy in the elm tree and bolts over the house. The poet wants to show the way the vacancy is full of the life pass through it. I don't think the emptiness appearing in the screen of leaves in Hillside, like a window carved out of a green Arc de Triomphe, has anything to do with a maker, a bird of passage. You sometimes can find yourself wishing for a hawk or a hare or a woman at a cottage door in Cézanne. But the next moment, you know the rock face and the windowless farm have to be as remote from our doings as they are in Cézanne, in order to be our representatives, us in the world, us become colors. Look at the plain-carved fields and the tallest tree raising its stubby hand in prayer or surrender. Look at the air, blue as nothing. This is eternity with just one blemish, a tiny dark oval high on the hill, rearing leftwards and toppling into its own shadow like a tank at the Battle of the Somme. I hear the sound of artillery clattering in the rocks. The green is smoke from a shell hole. So then the next one, please. Yeah. Well, this one's not about a painting, although you'll see in the end that there's an image to which it moves. It's about, it's called Class. It's certainly about the English class system, God damn it, and the place of me and my family within it. We were what the English call lower middle class. I mean, you're all hopeless in America about what on earth middle class means. It seems to mean everybody, but in England, I guess you'd say there's a crucial distinction between the lower middle class, or what we of Marxists used to call the petit bourgeoisie, and the working class. And the working class in England in the great social democratic decades after the Second World War lived in houses like these, if they were lucky, if they were very lucky. Council houses. So council houses crop up. It's called Class, this poem. It could be called Fathers. It's, you'll see why. I remember one evening in the 1970s, my father saying they should write on my tombstone, he didn't like to be leaned on. He was a dab hand at epitaphs. His for himself was, he was quite good, but not quite good enough. And even this was denied him. Damn the plastic urn. His for me was meant kindly, I think, coming as it did from a man trying to make sense of so many things he felt I was doing wrong. Politics, to begin with, power over others, success, marriage, settling down somewhere, caring for what mattered and not for things like poetry I wasn't born for. He said, maybe on the same occasion, that the one good thing about my mother's wretched death was that she didn't live to fail to understand my walking away, not from her, she was used to that, but from the meaning of life. Ah, the meaning of life. How my mother clung to it and then let go. What am I supposed to do with this pain, she asked finally. Just bear it? I wonder if my father's mildness toward me through this time of trouble had buried in it a sense that he was to blame. Nothing about our semi round the corner from the council houses, after all, was out of the ordinary, except the green folders piled in the bottom of his desk, tied with gold string, unless I'm romancing. A desk so ugly that even 70 years later, I cannot bear to look at its beveled edges and hear the creak of hinges as a typewriter is placed on its folded leaf. I had my chance in the war, my father said, when real writers, men with degrees, were off chasing Rommel. Ah, the corner with the council houses, climbing the hill to the pub. How I never understood the look on my parents' faces as we passed them by. Brutal, the stamp, these rejected things. Boys' stories, plays for radio, the mushroom men from Mars, paper flaking from its cover 1 and 6, can put on a life. I'll show you the, can you go to the next image, please? Yeah, there it is. This is the Mushroom Men from Mars, one of the books that my father did get published. Would you believe it that, of course, everything's online now. And I mean, I have a extremely, battered and wonderful old copy of it that he gave me. But everything's online now, and it's somehow or other appropriate that the online entry says that Lee Stanton's Mushroom Men from Mars was written by somebody else, not by F.T. Clarke at all. So I'll show you the next image, please. Yeah, well, there's the inside of my copy of Mushroom Men from Mars by Lee Stanton, alias F.G. Clarke. So I'm just putting the record straight. So the next one, could we have the next image too, please? Wonderful picture by Manet of Madame Monet and her son, with Monet in the background doing the gardening. This one's called Manet and Monet and Marx and Freud, in which all outstanding problems of art history are settled to everyone's satisfaction. What mattered more for Manet and Monet, that Manet had money or Monet had manners? Mattered to what, pray? Mattered to whom? To Monet's manner or just Manet's mother? And just what do you mean by that, bad manners, just? What matters more to a man than his mother? What matters more to a manner than money? We know Monet's manner was indebted to Manet, maybe even his manners, and his manners meant marriage and money for Manet's and many things more. So did Manet matter more to Monet than mother? I mean Monet's mother, though Manet's might do. It depends, does it not, on the meaning of matter and what money meant to a man without means. We know Madame Monet was once painted by Manet. The Madame, I mean, was the first Monet married, the one without money, the one that died young. She was shown with her son on the grass in the garden, the proud mother of Monet's, as Monet looked on. And the picture was done in a manner like Monet's, or a manner his mother would not have thought Manet's, a manner indeed she might have thought mad. I mean, Manet's mother, though Monet's might do. Maybe maternity always is manifold, and manners are matters that mothers decree, in which case this painting's not Manet's or Monet's, but Madame's or mother's. And what matters more than putting an end to that mad either or? Better say simply, he did it for Monet, though the market at that moment had moved Monet's way. Marx would have said, these are all money matters. Freud would have said, it depends what that means. There is never an end to the meanings of money, the madness of matter, the meanness of mothers. Otherwise, why would man A be a Manet and man B be a Monet, manner and all? Manet and Monet may be nothing but manners, but what manners, what Monets? Why need there be more? What's money? What's Manet? It's Manets that matter. the way that their matter is made to have meaning manually, maddeningly, matter-of-factly. What matters is manner, it's manner that means. And then one, just last one, quite short. The next, please, yes. This comes back, this is Poussin's great painting, another in the National Gallery in London. Landscape with a man killed by a snake, the corpse in the foreground there. And Mia was saying, yeah, comes back to what Mia was saying about how much you can deeply love something, but also hate it, or sort of not understand your own love, and not be entirely in tune with your own love of this painting or art, really. So this is about that, I guess. On the steps of the National Gallery. I'm on my way in to destroy Poussin's landscape with a man killed by a snake. I know what I'm doing, believe me. When it has ceased to be part of our world, we shall go without tragedy finally, and forget why we followed in the running man's footsteps day after day, round the corner into the light. Once it is over, there will be no more choking and spluttering in the black stream, feeling the creature's glistening inner tube tightening at our throats. No more soft explosions of hair in water, Diderot's electric scintillating extension of self, his thread of atoms glitter in the static, all senseless and endless as we are shown them here, top heavy, twisted in fetters, dragged along in this current, squeezed sentimentally from the rock. Dawn must not be our metaphor, you understand. The young man leans closer so I get the spray of his sibilance in my face, but his voice is familiar, gentle. I have found a way to get free from futurity and look daylight in the face. We shall make a space. He's reached the first pillar of the portico, half turning toward this cold square. There will be no stream winding out of sight in the landscape I have in mind for us. Everything will be visible forever. No balance, no level lake, no human care, no hands reaching out to sign and soothe, only the rumble of the excluded at the chained front gate, the snake standing upright at last, the mob in the closing scene of Marino Faliero, straining and failing to catch the rabble-rouser's last words. Down through the centuries comes the sound of a broom, sweeping colors into a corner, and a note in a Puritan's daybook. Ladders, poles, clippers for lead. God's work in the long afternoon yesterday, how we rattled down proud Beckett's glassy bones. Rain drifts exultantly through the empty lights. The iconoclast turns to his loom. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim.
Thanks, Walter.
Joachim, do you want to take things from here?
Yes, how to take things over and so on. This is, well, I almost feel like we need a few good seconds of silence to let the, the weight of these two words that struck me in one of Tim's poems, the one on Cézanne, is this, let this radiance unfold in us. I don't know quite where to go with this, and all I know is that whatever I'm going to say now is going to feel very, very deeply inadequate. But let me start maybe with the obvious, Tim, perhaps, if you don't mind. I mean, as you all know, frequent viewers, listeners to this program and to the rail in general, the founder of the rail, Van Goyen, I hope he's with us, has this ongoing parallel engagement in these two forms of art. Yes, two forms of art: poetry and art history. And Nick, Anselm, correct me if I'm wrong, but it is, at least to me, the first time that we really see this cross-insemination, in life insemination with Mia, with Lytle, and of course through here with Tim. And this leads me to one remark, Tim, we discussed before outside this program, which is that there's very little occurrence in the history of art in general of this cross-insemination, of this crossing or crossover between poetry and art history, except in this key moment in Germany in the 1790s, the birth of Romanticism, which is known in German as the Urromantik. People they're not terribly well known to people who have not studied, but Schlegel and Novalis, somebody who's not known at all, called Carl Philipp Moritz. And those guys articulate a language that I find very fecund, if I may say, Tim, to actually respond to the words you shared with us today. I'm just going to give a couple of very, very brief quotes, and maybe you may want to say whether I'm completely off about my rocker or whether you think there's something there. But Schlegel in the Anthenaeum says, poetry is to all of the other arts what friendship and love are to life. And this is, by the way, in something that the document that is known as the Romantic Manifesto, 1796, I believe. And in other words, without poetry, we fall into the quagmire of dullness. And thank goodness, Tim, you definitely have saved us from this dullness ever so much, and both of you as well, of course. And then another very quick one from this guy called Carl Philipp Moritz, who's been recently translated. Many of these guys were not known, by the way, until recently. Moritz, a contemporary of Schlegel, says, "One can only approach poetry critically through poetry." And here, Tim, I'm turning to you now as the art historian, great poet that you are. What Moritz is saying, and he's sharing this with most of his romantic peers, is that, I mean, basically, to put it simply, he is conferring to poetry a cognitive value, as big, if not bigger than, art criticism or art history itself. So I know this sounds a little provocative, a little strange, perhaps, but I'm wondering what you make out of this, Tim.
Yeah. Well, Joachim, we better step back from kind of dumping on art history, right? I mean, I've done it. I've done it too long. But art history is a little bit afraid of kind of confronting the nature of visual experience, I think, and it treasures the history in its title,
right.
Not the art, and I always remember, I think it was Gombrich saying, most art historians are very afraid of being mistaken for art appreciation types or guides in the museum. They'll have aesthetic to be to be worried. But let's just sort of switch from that. I mean, look, there have been art historians who break all those rules, right? Like Roberto Longhi in Italy, who is one of the great manipulators of the Italian language, right, in order to get on somehow or other on terms with painting. Enormous influence on Pasolini and so on. So there are crucial exceptions,
right.
But and anyway, I don't draw a hard line between prose and poetry, right? I mean, I'm a prose writer. Occasionally, try my hand at poetry. But you know, I don't think there's any distinction. I just think one should try hard to make language reach out to this strange other system called depiction, you know, which sort of seemed to emerge from the very beginning of the kind of dominance of language as a human behavior, as an answering, well, of course it's not answering, I'm not answering back, you know, a wordless answering back about aspects of the world that language can't quite get at. Right. And I mean, that's been tremendously fertile for poets. Poets love to write about paintings. Right? You know, not always all that well, but I mean, you know, they can't stop writing about paintings.
Right.
And that's because somehow or other, you know, they know that paintings sort of, well, if they're lucky, they'll lead them out of this virtual reality of language, which we all love. We're all inside it, but we have a bad conscience about the power of language, and poetry is part of that bad conscience, right? It's always trying to say, well, can I make language do something that makes some other aspect of the world appear for a moment?
Right. Yeah, that's so beautifully put. And I think you're right about warning us to try to perhaps step away from artistry as we traditionally. And there's this. I mean, since I've been privileged, like a few of us, to read this yet unpublished book, and there's a marvelous text which you didn't read. You could have gone on quite for a few hours again, but it is what is actually the title? I'm sorry, you have to help me. It's about teaching.
Teaching, yes. It's Mia will enjoy this. The title is Teaching, and then the first line is, teaching is the most unpoetic of activity, but I don't see why.
No. Exactly.
And,
So I'd like to dwell here on an interesting paradox, to say the least, and that is because we have Mia among many of your. I've seen glimpses of old friends and ex-students of yours. Nancy Locke, she seems to have left. Christopher Campbell, I don't know if he was a student of yours. Jeremy Milius, I saw, etc. And so, and I could go on. In fact, when I discussed this with you, I mean, I've never read a PhD thesis, a PhD dissertation for fun. I don't think there are many of us who do it. But when it comes to thesis, dissertations by students of T.J. Clarke, it's a different magnum, different quantum. You know, I have Catherine Tuma as an example. Milius definitely one. You read those things. I read those things cover to cover. This is the only dissertations I've ever read for fun, and so I don't think it is a happenstance that we have here Tim Clarke revealing himself, unfolding himself to many of us who did not know about this, as a true poet, and who really is like treats language like jewelers treat a precious uncut diamond, and has managed to, Mia is a living example here, to pass on this love of language, to use a Barthes expression here. So might you want to comment on that, Tim? I mean, I definitely don't know many people like you here, if I do.
well, listen, you know, the names you and the PhDs you've referred to are entirely, you know, it's because they were damn good writers. Of course, you put the stress on. You know, it comes back to that. It comes back just to the simple point we were already making. That what a tremendous opportunity there is. You know, making language match up to music. Whew, that's, some people have done it, right? Donald Tovey and so on. But I mean, that's ferociously different.
Yeah,
Making language match up to language, right? That's hard in itself, right? You know, if the language, you know, the literary criticism of a poem is difficult, but you're in the same territory. There isn't the same tension or the same gap. Whereas I think making language match up to an image or a sculpture, to a visual fact, it's a mid-ground, right? You know, it's difficult, but somehow or other, you know, we're in a shared figurative world, right? Unlike with music. So the challenge is hard, but possible, I think. You know, and I think it's as simple as that. You always to say, well, you know, look, there's so much to be done here, and it's so interesting to try to do it. Simply that.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating. Well, maybe with these remarks, Tim, we might. I've never had the privilege of being a student in a classroom with you. I would have loved to, but we have so many people here who are there. Perhaps we could turn to maybe Mia and maybe I don't know if Jeremy's still around, but to maybe share with us what was it like to be in a classroom with T.J. Clarke, and was that dimension of language, of this central almost tactile dimension of language present in the air somehow? I don't know what I'm saying, but you know what I'm trying to say. So can you expand a little bit on that, Mia?
Yes, I mean, it was definitely in the air. I remember we took Tim offered a seminar on Guernica, which is, of course, one of the most written about paintings of all time. What more could be written about it? Well, Tim, of course, showed that there could be more, but at the same time, it was, I mean, the first week he said, okay, I just want you to look at the painting and write what you see. And don't think about any art history, don't think about anything else that you've read or any of just what do you see? And that was just, I mean, it was one of the hardest assignments I've ever had, actually, to just sit down and write what I saw there. And it really opened my eyes to this painting that had become so iconic and so and almost one-dimensionally iconic in some ways too, right? You stop really looking at it, and the fact that we did that. And then, of course, he actually brought our seminar to Madrid and made us go see the painting every day, kind of a mini site of death, but with Guernica. And that was also an incredible experience. And also then at that point to be like, okay, now that, you know, we start really looking at the painting, how do we find language that can actually convey what we see and not fall back into the same paradigms, the same kind of discourse that was there before? So that production of a new language that truly arises from what it is that one experiences and observes and encounters in the work of art. Yeah, that was an incredible experience to have as a student and as a poet.
Were you already a poet by that time, Mia? Or?
I was trying to be.
and how?
Yeah.
I see. Yeah. It strikes me that what Tim, and here, of course, fortuitous, mercifully, you are not alone, but definitely in a small minority as far as I can see, but you approach language about art history. Sorry to return to art history, but that after all what you've been teaching all your life is instead of a transitive function, you know, from A to B to C, you said it yourself, you're stepping away from that positivistic approach to language, which is not like a mirroring situation of the painting giving you the truth about any given work of art, but you actually yourself create one might say an analogon, and hence poetry, which functions in the same way, a textual entity, a textual creation, poiesis, you know, it comes from the word to make, that is standing next to the painting, not reflecting it, but activating in us situations, phenomenological situations, aesthetic situations, emotional situations that are resonating with the painting. I don't know whether that you agree with that.
Well, I've thought a lot about this. You know, I mean, let me start from this. You know, obviously there's a strong tradition, right, going right back to the ancients of poetic performances which attempt or claim to transpose the picture, right, or completely somehow or other into language. The Greek word is ekphrasis. Yes, ekphrasis. I'm an enemy of ekphrasis, right? I don't want the poem to take the place of the painting.
Yeah, I see.
Because exactly the poem should be all the time aware that there are things about the painting that are absolutely crucial to it, which make it fascinating and rewarding of looking and looking and looking, that are outside the realm of language, and the language can only come towards it but never quite get there. So rather than ekphrasis, I like the idea of it's an incomplete analogy, this, but I would like a poem to be more like a performance of a piece of music, right? A performance of a painting. In the sense that, look, some people like performances of piano music or something that are, God, they're so brilliant that they make you forget Chopin or Mozart, and you're just looking at, well, I won't name names, right? But you're looking at the virtuoso. On the contrary, I think the great performances are ones where, of course, you see that the performer has chosen cadences and rhythms and given a coherence to the performance, which makes it something in its own right, but all the time somehow or other profoundly at the service of the notes on the page, right? The thing there. It's an incomplete analogy, but you see sort of roughly what I'm going for, and there's no one way towards that, right? Name a couple of poets who I think do wonderfully at performing paintings, right? The classic instance, William Carlos Williams, pictures from Bruegel, poems which are trying very, very hard to hew directly to the object, which is a Bruegel. And in many ways, I think he's wonderfully caught in a bind here, because he can't prevent himself. He can't prevent language from having opinions and making its own distance. And language is not object, even in his hands. Another poet I tremendously admire, a wonderful last book by the Irish poet Karen Carson, called Still Life, really wonderfully, highly recommended. All about paintings, and this is a dying man writing about paintings as he died of cancer. Extraordinary book. But you see, he wanders in and out between the thing, the painting, and life, going to the hospital, having more chemo, radiation. So the boundaries between his experience and the painting, and this continual puzzlement about, well, why on earth could it be in this circumstance that I find myself drawn back to a painting I've lived with for 20 years of a vase of peonies. So the painting's about the puzzlement about what it is that painting can offer you, even in the most extreme of circumstance. So there's no one way, right? But those two examples seem to me more like performances than ekphrases.
Yes, yes, yes. No, thank you for this. This is beautiful. Yes, it actually reminds me of an example. I forget his name now, but it's a disciple of John Cage, who once took a painting he liked, set it up on a instead of a partition, and started performing in front of it, like a literal exact equivalent of what you were describing. Fascinating. But I see many members on the audience, and time is ticking, and who most certainly have questions. So maybe this is the time for us to share the mic. Anselm, can you help? Or?
Yeah, I think Fong wanted to say a few words. Fong, are you there?
Hi, Anselm. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's great to hear you read your poems, and I enjoy very much immensely. Everyone else is there too, Tim. It's very inspiring because at the Rail, we honor the poets. In fact, sometimes we put them above the artists, but we don't want to tell the artists that because we raise the funding from the object, Tim, that the artist made in order to support our poets' friends. Because you can't really buy a poem. But in any rate, thinking about poetry in general, I know that when I was I think it was Philadelphia University at my third year in college, I took a poetry class with Stephen Berg, the editor of American Poetry. And the same summer, I was able to buy the whole entire 10th issue of the Seven Arts. It was an excellent magazine that was published between 1916 to 17, edited by 3 poets. Not as known now, but maybe one of them is known, and some might know them all, in fact. James Oppenheim, Waldo Frank, and Van White Brooks. And it was a great magazine because it published all kinds of poets like Amy Lowell, Theodore Dreiser, and Sherwood Anderson, people like that. And I always loved its mission statement, anti-mission statement. It say, I'm paraphrasing, Seven Art is an art magazine for artists, but it is not a magazine for artists, but an expression of artists for the community. And I enjoy that very much. I'm just have one quick question, Tim. You mentioned Robert Longi,
Yes.
who had tremendous influence on Pasolini. And I was thinking the same breath, thinking now I have managed to read a few poems that Maya Shapiro wrote. Because
really?
he was very close friend. One of his best friend was the poet who died fairly young, who taught it. And who was this that who taught at Syracuse University?
Talking about Delmar Schwartz?
Delmar Schwartz, exactly.
Yeah.
And I have gone back and forth the exchange of their friendship. And it's apparent, it's very few that there was certain influence. They worked together super close. So I'm wondering whether you have similar poets friend that you maintain that constant relationship, poets friend, whether here or England or even early on in your upbringing.
Sure I did. Yeah, sure I have. Very severe, some of them too. I mean, it's not, there's no one like poets to let you know that your poetry isn't up to snuff. But that's good too. That's great to hear that Delmar Schwartz and Maya Shapiro were so close. Delmar Schwartz wrote very interesting, terrific poem. I've always loved about the Sunday afternoon on the island of the Grand Jet, the Syrah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, really good poet, really good poem. And again, Shapiro, of course, brings us back to this idea, which I really don't want to suggest, that there's this boundary line between arid prose and, you know, poetry, which measures up to the reality of painting. On the contrary, you know, I mean, my book on Cézanne is really in some ways a continuing dialogue all the way through with this marvelous book by Mara Shapiro on Cézanne. And, you know, Shapiro's prose is in many ways, you know, more at the service of the experience of particular paintings than, you know, most people's poetry. So all hail to him, you know. I mean, I start off really by, you know, paying homage to Shapiro, to Roger Fry, you know, who's deliberately the most prosaic of writers, right?
Yes.
Sort of, you know, a kind of, in an English way, dry and prosaic. But that's deliberate, and that too is a tactic which enables you sometimes in Roger Fry's writing to be absolutely face to face with the picture.
Even after Virginia Woolf's biography on Fry, you wouldn't change your mind on his dryness?
Well, listen, I think he can be awful, but he can be great. And the book on Cézanne is inspired. It's again, apropos of art history. It's so funny that Mara Shapiro's book on Cézanne is in a Abrams edition, right? Library of the Great Artists, 1951, for a
Yes.
wide, ordinary New York American reading public, not really
Yes.
history.
Yeah.
And Roger Fry's book on Cézanne was originally a catalog essay for a, you know, for a show.
Yes.
So, you know, art history is a weird discipline. In that, in my view, you know, so many of its highest achievements sort of aren't, well, they aren't really art history. Thank God.
Well, Tim, I just want to mention that please send over a portrait of your most favorite headshot, because the one when Catherine did an interview with you for us, that was in I think it's 2016.
Yeah.
2006 actually.
Oh,
It
yeah.
was a time when I didn't draw seriously, so I need to make a real serious portrait of you again.
Okay.
For the archive. Yes.
Okay. I have been warned.
Yes. So I just want to share with everyone my favorite Plutarch quote that say, "Painting is silent poetry, and poetry is painting that speaks." And then 40 something, no, I mean, it must be easily a century later, that Leonardo says, "Painting is poetry that is seen rather than felt, and poetry is painting that felt rather than seen." The great Leonardo. So that's my tribute to your being a poet, Tim. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Back to you, Ransom.
Really great.
Thank you, Fong.
Thanks, Fong. Well, I think we're sort of running up against our time limit here. So I would go ahead, Joachim. I just want to
maybe I saw that Mia was posting a really interesting question to both Tim and Lytle, and that might be a nice way to conclude, if you agree, Anselm. Mia, do you want to phrase a question?
Sure.
Because I thought there was a very interesting point about conceptual art and turning poetry as a performance itself. How did you?
Well, I'll be very quick. In terms of and thinking, I mean, as a poet, I think that we often hear a lot about how poets are always writing poetry after painting, but I'm quite curious about hearing about the opposite trajectory as well, about poetry or about language, the principles of language being transformed into image. And what Tim and Lytle think about that. I think, you know, conceptual art might be an example. There's, of course, arguments about Cubist collage is also perhaps an example of that. And certainly it's been framed that way by Apollinaire and others. And so
Lytle, why don't you? You haven't said enough. Go on. I want you to answer that.
I'll give it a try. I mean, I am interested most in, say, concrete poetry when it doesn't simply become an image, when it evokes image quality but resists at some level and becomes more complicated as a result of that. And I think I share Smithson's sense of conceptual art, that it's that in its purest form, it doesn't deal with matter enough. And I'm interested in that kind of messy conceptual art that is it's in some way still in dialogue with the problem of matter. And to me, concrete poetry, when it's good, is something that never resolves entirely into an image. It evokes image characteristics or image qualities, but mobilizes a kind of semantic richness inside language, inside the character and the sublexical to get this kind of bristling quality of potentiality. And I think actually concrete poetry is too often dismissed by American avant-gardes, and it would be interesting if it were taken up a little bit more as a precedent. So,
yeah, that's very interesting. I don't know enough about this. I mean, my experience with the moment of conceptual art, again, was a bit English. You know, I was sort of involved with, and still have as friends, people, you know, who are on the absolutist wing of this, right? The art and language group. And they were quite fascinatingly doctrinaire in that, you know, they basically thought, look, actually, painters fool themselves that they exist, or any of us exist, in a realm which isn't totally dominated by language. And so we will make our business the foregrounding in verbal terms of the absolute hegemony of the linguistic. And my God, they did, you know, or they tried to, and it was madness. You know, I still go on arguing with my old friend Terry Atkinson about exactly this. He still believes completely that all the arguments against the sort of Chomskyan view of language as the human characteristic and the one that makes our worlds, makes our humanity, he still believes that that's unchallengeable and that somehow or other art has to answer up to it. I couldn't disagree more. But as always in art, you know, there's something great about pushing a disagreement to the kind of nth degree.
Wow. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Lytle. Thank you, Mia. It's really, and I can tell from the number of people who are echoing. Thanks, what an amazing program this has been.
Thank you very much indeed, everyone, for, you know, really terrific time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks, Fong, for joining. Thank you, Ansel, co-coaching. Thank you.
Thank you all. And maybe now we can throw the mics open and say hello and goodbye.
Hello, goodbye.
Thank you all for being here.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Bye, Tim.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Joachim.
Thank you,
Thank
Tim.
you.
Thank you, Joachim.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay.
Joachim.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you, Mia.
Thank
And,
you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
you one or two old friends who are kind of not revealing themselves in the pictures, but I can see their names. So, you know, hello to you too, Joseph and Harold and so on. So,
Hello, Tim. How are you doing?
Oh, no, no, no.
I'm lurking here in the shadows and very happy with this whole debate. Very interesting, terrific conversation.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim.
Okay.
Congratulations on the book.
Bye.
I write
Thank
you
you.
right away.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Mia.
Bye-bye.
Oh,
Thank
yes.
you, Joachim.
Thank you, Fong.
Thank you, Ansem.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Lyle.
See you
Oh,
soon.
Sherry too. Terrific.
Congratulations.
Chadwick.
Much
Thanks a
love.
lot.
That was great.
Thank you. Let's go have lunch. We earn it.
Take care,
Yes.
everybody.
Thanks, Paul.
Woo. Much love. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah,
Bye.
much love to you.
Much love to
Hi,
you all.
Sherry.
And Anne.
Oh,
Tim.
there she is.
Hi.
There she is.
Oh,
Hooray.
yeah.
Sherry. Hello. Hello from Venice.
Edward Ludd.
Amazing.
He's the crucial character, Edward Ludd.
Thank you all once again.
Okay.
Take care,
Thanks a lot.
everyone. Stay safe. Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.